Welcome to an IlmQuest presentation.
Basic FIQH Zakah and Fasting, presented by Yasir Qadhi.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. The zakah and fasting. And we're going to zoom over the main salient features of these two chapters. The fiqh of zakah, again, very practical, very useful. Again, most people are not aware of the details of this matter. What exactly do we talk about when we talk about the fiqh of zakah? The first thing we talk about is the types of wealth, meaning what do you give zakat on? What is the type of properties, ownership, what do you have that you have to give zakah on? And as a sub thing of that, we have zakat al-fitr as well. There's another type of zakah. And we also talk about the recipients of zakah. Well, who do you give zakat to? Who qualifies as the recipients of zakah? And underneath this, there are more complicated topics. We'll get to them in their proper time. But these are the primary topics of zakah. What do you give zakat on? How much zakat do you give? And then as a subset, zakat al-fitr. And then lastly, who do you give zakat to? What are the types of wealth? When I say types of wealth, I mean obviously zakatable. What do you give zakat on? Obviously there's hundreds of types of wealth and property. What do you give zakat on? Most scholars categorize it into 4 categories. I've done so into 5 to make it easier, but it's the same content. The first category are domesticated animals that a person owns. Camels, cows, sheep, and goats. These animals, you give zakat on them only if you send them out, only if you, provide their food and water for them. So these animals, if a farmer owns these animals, if he provides the food and water, he brings the food, he brings the water, and he gives it to the animals, then there is zakat. Otherwise, if these animals are pastured out, if they have to be taken out for food and water, because of the effort involved, there is no zakat on them. Okay? As for the details, I will not go into them, I think for obvious reasons. Hardly anyone, in fact no one sitting here is a farmer, and the details is very easy. 30 camels you give, or 30 sheep you give, or 40 sheep is the minimum, 30 cows is the minimum, 5 camels is the minimum. If you have above them, this is what you give. It's a very simple chart. If anybody, does happen to own some camels or cows or sheep or goats somewhere, then they can look it up in any book of fiqh. There's hardly any ikhtilaf. It's very straightforward. You just plug and chug. You plug in the number of animals you have, and you come out with the zakat that you give. But like we said though, this is only for the animals that you provide for. As for if you send a shepherd out with them and they get the food from the field or water from the streams and you have to exert effort, then there is no zakat whatsoever. The second category of wealth which you give zakat on is agricultural produce. Agricultural produce, only that which is staple and not that which is perishable. Again, the sharia is very easy if you look at it. Only non-perishable food items. Okay, only non-perishable food items such as dates, such as rice, such as wheat. These type of agricultural produce, there is zakat on them. As for perishable food items such as apples and oranges, they perish quickly, they do not last. There is no zakat on them for the farmer for his personal consumption. Remember, we're talking about personal consumption for the agricultural produce and for the animals. He owns them, he uses them. We're not talking about business. That's a separate category. We're going to come to that. A person has some trees, some apples, for example, apple trees in his backyard. Or he owns a farm for his personal use for the family. This is what we're talking about. In agricultural produce, that which is staple, you give zakat the day of harvesting. When you harvest it, you give zakat from it right then and there. And you give 10% on those lands which are naturally watered. In other words, if you rely on rainwater, or there is a natural river or stream, and you don't have to do any effort, 10%. Otherwise, if you have to drain, if you have to feed it water, you have to drain the ditches, or you have to manually pump water out, or bring the water to the plants, irrigation, manual irrigation, then that goes down to 5%. Again, clear cut, very easy. The minimum amount is 5 wasaq. If you have more than 5 wasaq, basically a wasaq is 60 sa', it's like 60 bushels, like a large amount of food. It's not a small amount. You know, it's a large amount of staple food items. If you have it, then you give 10% if it's naturally watered and 5% if the water is manual irrigation. Again, not too much detail into this because it's not very practical. The third category is actually included in the second by most scholars. So if you read most books of fiqh, they will say that which the ground produces, which is divided into agricultural produce and ores and treasures. Just for simplicity's sake, I've divided into two separate categories. Ores and treasures. Ores meaning that natural things which you extract from the ground. You know, raw iron, raw copper, all of these things that you extract from the ground, and treasures. With these things that you find, you have to give 20% if it's above the nisab amount. And we're going to discuss the nisab amount in a little while. Now, what do I mean by treasure? This is where there's two opinions. One opinion, because the Prophet ﷺ said that in treasures you have to give 20%, 1/5. One opinion states that when he means by treasures are those treasures that were buried in Jahiliyyah times, and they have no Muslim owner to them. So if you come across a treasure somewhere, then you have to give zakat right then and there 20%, if it was buried in pre-Jahiliyyah days. Other ulama say any treasure you find it, and you don't know its owner, you don't know who it belongs to, then you take its possession of it, but you must give 20% zakat on that. There's an ikhtilaf, what is the meaning of treasure here? Okay, some ulama say the treasure refers only to the old Jahiliyyah treasures. And some ulama say it applies to any treasure, and the difference of opinion centers on the Arabic word and what it means. But in either case, whatever opinion you follow, it's 20% zakah right then and there, before you're allowed to own it. Same with ores. Again, not too much detail because it's very rarely applied. This is the main type of zakat. We give zakat on money. Now money means gold and silver and all currencies based on them. Okay? So the first time that paper currencies were introduced, there was a lot of ikhtilaf over the ulama. Is there zakat on these paper currencies? Because in the old days, all of the countries, without exception, would actually mint gold and silver. Their currency would be gold and silver. Even this country, the silver dollar and whatnot. You would actually have precious stones or precious metals. Same with the other countries as well. If you look at the old currencies of the previous countries, it's actual gold and silver. In our times, there is something called paper currency. Most of us have never seen the real currency that for thousands, if not millions of years was being used. We're living in this age where every country is producing pieces of paper which has this magnificent value to it. Obviously, the correct opinion is you must give zakah on paper money. If you follow the other opinion, there is no zakah basically. Hardly any alim says that. When it was first introduced, there was a big ikhtilaf. Now it's understood that there is zakah on this currency that we own. When we say there's zakah on currency, this is with two conditions. The first condition is that it is above the minimum amount of nisab. The minimum amount. If you have above this minimum amount, then you give zakah. If it's below the minimum amount, no zakah. And we're going to discuss the nisab. The second condition is that 1 year must pass since date of ownership. You have to have that money and that amount for 1 entire year. If 1 year has not passed, there's no need to give zakat. What is the nisab of money? Well, the Prophet ﷺ has defined it to be 20 mithqals of gold and 200 dirhams of silver. 200 dirhams of silver and 20 mithqals of gold. 1 mithqal would be equivalent to, 1 mithqal of gold is equivalent to 10 of silver. So if you do the mathematics, 20 mithqals of gold is equivalent to 200 dirhams of silver. Basically, if you translate it into our times, it's not that large of amount. Some scholars say around $800, $900, $1,000. It's not that much of an amount. If you translate it and do the conversion factor, it's an insignificant amount for most of us. It just shows that you have enough that you saved above the bare means of your livelihood. You've saved it for the whole year. It actually translates out to 580 grams of silver. So if you calculate how much a gram of silver is and do the mathematics, it's less than $1,000. Okay, less than 1,000 US dollars. If you have more than this throughout the year, then you have to give zakah, and the amount, as everybody knows, is 2.5%. Now the way that you do it in our times is very simple. The scholars say it a very easy way. Basically, you draw a mental picture of your bank account, if that is where all your money is. Or all of your money, you add it together, and you draw a mental graph of it going up and down throughout the year. You know, every time you got your paycheck goes up a bit, then you pay your rent, everything. A mental picture. The lowest point on that graph for the year, for the 12 months, that is where you have to give zakat on. Because that is what you've had for the entire year. Okay? So this is an easy way. There's a much more complicated way, but it does the same thing. This is the easy way, is that you have one date that you have to choose. This is the first step. Most people choose, let's say, 1st of Ramadan. Remember, it's the lunar year, not the solar year. You can't choose the 1st of January or the day you give your taxes. No, it has to be the lunar year. You give zakah more often than the solar year because there's 11 days difference. You choose one day of the Islamic year. Doesn't matter what it is. But most people like to give it in Ramadan just because it's extra blessings, but it's not inherently of the sunnah. Do whatever you want. Suppose you say 1st of Ramadan. Then you draw a, mental, or if you want a physical graph, literally, of how much money you had throughout the year. Okay? The minimum amount that you had throughout the entire year, that is your taxable, zakatable, if you like, amount, 2.5%. All other expenses, whether it's for the house, the car, whatever it is, you can exclude that, and the bare minimum that you had throughout the year, you give zakat 2.5% of that amount. The 5th category of wealth is business items. What do I mean by business items? I mean the stock that a person buys and sells, not the stock of the market, the stock meaning his trade. If a person buys and sells cars, his stock of cars. Okay? If a person buys and sells houses, this houses that he buys and sells. A person buys and sells clothes, his merchandise, if you like. This is called business items. Okay? If a person buys and sells anything, most of us, we have paid salaries. So we don't have any business items that we buy and sell. But there's businessmen, there's traders. These people, the equipment or the machinery or the clothing or the textile, whatever they buy and sell, their actual unit of buying and selling, that is taxable, that is zakatable, and the zakat must be paid also once a year, the same 2.5% and the same nisab. Let me give you an example now. A person buys and sells cars. He has a car showroom. He'll choose one day of the year, 1st of Ramadan. When the 1st of Ramadan arrives, whatever item he has in his showroom, the cars, he calculates their value and he gives 2.5% of that. That's it. It doesn't matter if the day before some rich man walked in and says, I want to buy 10 cars, and he buys 10 of his cars. If it wasn't planned, it's forgiven. It doesn't matter the day before he gets a new shipment of 100 cars, and usually he only has, let's say, 50. But that particular day, one day before 100 cars came, that's his responsibility. That day of the year, he calculates his zakah and gives it on that day. Whatever is in stock. Because again, it will be too difficult for the Sharia to ask us to calculate every day the stock in and out. It's too much. So it has simplified things and said one day of the year. You choose, after that you be consistent. And don't play tricks with the Sharia. Allah knows your niyyah. Don't buy right before the zakat date or sell trying to get out of it. This is, Allah knows your niyyah, and if you do so, you're sinful. But if it so happens someone comes in and says he wants to buy your entire stock, that's, you are exempt from the zakat on business items then. But then your money is a separate issue now, remember. It's transferred from 5 to 4, right? Because you just got $500,000, let's say, it goes up to number 4. And then you wait 1 year on that, and then you give zakat on the money. But we're talking about business items. Now when we say business items, we are specifically talking about what a person buys and sells. We are not talking about the equipment he needs to buy and sell. So for example, a person has a clothing store. Now he's going to have racks that hang the clothes. He's going to have cashiers. He's going to have counters. He's going to have a lot of things that are not bought and sold, but he needs them for the shop. If a person, is buying and selling cars, he's going to have a showroom. He's going to have a lot of things. That is not zakatable, That is not zakatable. There is no zakat on the permanent things that he needs for his business. The zakat is only due on the actual items that he is engaged in business in. Okay, I think it's pretty clear. You only give zakat on the actual trade items and not on the items you need to do that trade. Because that is your possession, you own it. Okay, you have a clothing store, you own the hooks, the hangers, the material that you hang the clothes on, the carpets, the show, you own that. You don't give zakat on that. You only give zakat on the actual clothing items. You calculate their value in one day of the year and you give zakat right then and there. These are the 4 or 5 items, depends on how you want to categorize them. There is no zakat on anything else. You don't give zakah on your house, on your cars, on your clothes, on your other possessions. There is absolutely no zakah. These are the 5 types of wealth that you have to give zakat on, and that is it. Nothing else. As a side point, stocks, without getting into the technicality of halal, haram, halal, haram, let's just give the fatwa immediately. If a person has stocks, they come under number 5, because it's a business thing. So stocks, one day of the year, whatever their value is, you give zakat right then and there. Okay? Because it's a business item, you're buying and selling in it. So the scholars state that the stocks, if you have them, they take the status or the category of a business item, in that you have one day set aside, and that day you calculate the value, the market value of the stock, and you give zakat 2.5% if it's above the nisab of the market value. One last issue, jewelry, women's jewelry. Is there zakat on women's jewelry? This is one of the biggest issues of zakah, where there's a lot of controversy and a lot of difference of opinion, because the question arises, does it come under personal possessions like house, car, clothes, or does it come under number 4, gold and silver, money? This is where the ikhtilaf comes. How would you categorize jewelry? You categorize jewelry as a personal possession, because if you have a business suit worth $1,000, right, or you have let's say like a platinum ring, a woman has a platinum ring with $500,000, there's no zakat on it if she uses it, because it's platinum, it's not gold and silver. Okay, but if she has gold and silver, does that come under non-zakatable like other possessions, or does it come under number 4, money? And it seems, and Allah knows best, that the ruling is it comes under money, and that there is zakat on gold and silver, because the Prophet ﷺ clearly said to a woman who was wearing silver, and to her daughter who was also wearing silver, do you give zakat on it? She said no. The Prophet ﷺ said, do you wish to wear a ring from the fire of hell? So it seems that Allah knows best that women's jewelry is an exception to the possessions. Every possession that you own for your personal use, there's no zakat on it, except for jewelry. Now we say women's jewelry because men don't have gold and silver, they're not allowed to wear gold. But if it so happens that a man has some silver or something, he must also give zakat on that. He puts it all together with his money, he adds it all up. And if it's above the nisab, then he gives 2.5% at one go. Okay? Now all the brothers are looking depressed when I said about the jewelry. I must mention that the woman who owns her jewelry, she must give zakat, not the husband. She owns the jewelry. Okay? So now everyone's happy and smiling. However, if the husband wants to, he can give it on her behalf. That's his option and prerogative. It's as if he's giving her money, and then she can give that money on her behalf. It's up to him. But whoever owns the property gives the zakah. The husband, if he doesn't own the jewelry, he does not give the zakah. So the woman, if she owns the jewelry, it is her responsibility and her obligation to give the zakah. If she doesn't have cash and her jewelry is above the nisab amount, the 20 mithqals of silver, 200 grams of gold, 200 dinars of gold, if it's above the nisab and she doesn't have cash, she must sell some of the jewelry to get the cash, 2.5%, and then give that in zakah. And if the husband wishes to, he can give it on her behalf. It is as if he gave her a gift of money, and that money she can give it as zakah. We now move on to zakat al-fitr. Zakat al-fitr is a special type of zakah, which is just discussed as a side chapter, and then we move on to the other topics of zakah. The purpose of zakat al-fitr is to purify the sins of the one who has fasted. We all know this, is that zakat al-fitr is only due after Ramadan. It is to purify the sins of those who have fasted, and it must be given before the prayer of Eid al-Fitr. And it's allowed to be given a day or two before, but not much before this. This is a common mistake. Many people give zakat al-fitr 15th of Ramadan. This is a mistake. The Prophet ﷺ intended zakat al-fitr to be given on the day of Eid. But he allowed a concession for a day or two before. A short time, 3 days even, 4 days even, but a short amount of time. Not 2 weeks or 3 weeks before. Zakat al-fitr should be given as late as possible before Eid, before the actual Eid prayer. It is obligatory on every single Muslim, whether he fasted or not, whether he's male or female, child or adult, sane or insane. Every Muslim, slave or free person even, is obligatory as long as they have enough to feed themselves and their families for that one day, if they have more than that. So the conditions of zakat al-fitr are different than the normal zakat. There is no nisab. The nisab is you have enough to feed yourself for one day and your family for one day. So zakat al-fitr might be obligatory on certain people, even though zakat might not be obligatory on them. Okay? Zakat al-fitr is obligatory on more people than the actual zakat is. The amount of zakat al-fitr is very small. It is 1 sa' of staple food items. 1 sa' is equivalent to 4 cupfuls. A handful, You take a hand, you cup it together. 4 of them equals 1 sa'. A small amount, maybe like 4 or 5 pounds. I haven't done the calculations, but it's a very small amount. 1 bag, if you like, of any staple food item. This is what the Prophet ﷺ would give. He would usually give dates, but barley, wheat, even rice in our times, any staple food item, this is zakatul fitr. The question that everybody asks, we give money, or I give money, or I can't find people to give zakah. Frankly speaking, most people do not try to find people who want to take food items. Me personally, when I used to live in Houston, we would always find the people that need zakat in money, in staple food items. We would always hunt down some families, some refugees, Muslim refugees, that they would need these items as food, and we would collect together. And remember, like 10 people can get together to give a huge bag of rice. It'll last them a few months. Another 10 people give them a huge bag of flour or barley. Another 10 give them other things. Also, realize, it is not obligatory that the poor people eat that food. They're allowed to sell it. So you can give them a large amount, let's say, of wheat or flour or dates or something, and then if they want to keep some and sell the rest, that's their prerogative. It's not that they have to eat it, it is just sunnah to give it in food items. Now, however, I do state that, realistically speaking, sometimes that might not be possible. Try your best. If it so happens you cannot do so, then, give it to as money, and inshallah, Allah will accept it. But the fact of the matter is, most Muslims are, lazy in this regard. And this is, in fact, one of the blessings of following the sunnah. You're going to hunt down people that need money. Otherwise, you just give it to the box there in, the center you pray, and that's it, end of story. But now, in this case, if you have to give it according to the sunnah, you're going to ask around, who is that poor that they want to have food? And he's a Muslim, obviously. You're going to ask for the poor people. You're going to find them. When you form relationships with them, then you will benefit them in the future as well. When you have money to give, you know who to give it to directly. Okay? And this is one of the benefits. When you follow the sunnah, you always find benefits and beauties and wisdoms behind it. Otherwise, like I said, if you just put it in the box, that's it. You have no contact with the poor. But if you go out of your way, try to find these people, have personal relationships, see how they live, see the conditions they're in, then your heart will become softer. You'll give them more regularly. You'll give them more than you usually give. So it changes the whole ballgame. So I say that zakatul fitr should be given in food items, as the sunnah. The Sahaba never gave money. The Prophet never gave money. Even though for other types of zakah he gave money. There must be a wisdom behind it. There must be a reason. Everybody likes money more than food, because the money can give you that same food. But he didn't give them money, he gave them food. And of the wisdoms that Allah knows best is you have to form relationships with the poor people. Go out of your way, call around, ask around, maybe even visit them. And how many people do that, with the poor? So this is of the wisdoms, but like I said, if it's not possible, inshallah, may Allah forgive us, and whatever we can do, if you have to give it in money, it should be done. One point, those that are responsible for collecting the zakatul fitr, they need to make sure that it's distributed before the prayer. There's another common mistake, is that those organizations that collect zakatul fitr, they collect hundreds of thousands of dollars before the prayer. And then the people pray and the zakah is still lying in those boxes. The zakah must be given to the needy before the Eid prayer. That is the whole point. And this is a big, big mistake. And in fact, we are responsible, because we know when we go to Eid and we hand in that zakat over there, at that box, we know that that will last for days and months and years. It's not going to be given to the poor. So we have not really done our obligation. Zakatul fitr needs to be distributed before the actual Eid prayer. That's the whole point of zakatul fitr, is that you give it so that nobody is hungry on those days. Everybody's enjoying. Even the poorest of the poor is going to have more than what he needs to feed his family and relatives. That is zakatul fitr. The question arises regarding debts and zakah. What do you do if you have a debt, you've given a loan, you've accepted a loan? How do you give zakat on that money? The zakah on that money, who lends this loan, he gives the zakah if the money is present and available. What do I mean by this? Someone gave $50,000 to a person to start a business, okay? This is a loan, not a business. That's a different thing. If you're a business partner, that's separate. We're talking about a sadaqah loan, which means you give loan and you expect the same amount back. It doesn't matter if he's successful or not. It's not a business. You're giving him a loan and you want your money back. In this case, you gave him $50,000, okay? The year goes by and you see him flourishing. He to open a restaurant, his restaurant is flourishing, lots of people are coming. Okay, you know that he has the money. But, you're being nice to him, say, I'll ask him next year. You know he has the money, so it is as if the money is there, it is as if it is in your account, because you know he's going to give it back to you. Therefore, you need to give zakah on that money. However, you give him the money and the business was a flop. And he says, brother, please forgive me, allow me a few more years, I'm going to give you zakah, I'm going to give you the money back, just give me some more time. So the money doesn't exist. You don't know when it will happen. You don't know when you will get it back. In this case, you don't give zakah until he finally gives you that money. Because you don't know how many years it will be before you get that zakah from him. So it's not fair for you. It's possible he will die and he doesn't have that money. It's not fair for you that you keep on giving zakah when that money doesn't even exist. Okay? So to simplify, again, there's a lot of ikhtilaf, I'm simplifying it a lot, is that when there is a loan, the one who accepts the loan, he doesn't give zakah because it's not technically his money. You have to own the thing to give the money, to give the zakah. The one who lends, he has to see the situation. If he gives he gives the loan to someone who has that money after a year, he should give zakah. For that year and every year he has the money. And if he gives the loan to a person who does not have that money, then in that case, he doesn't give zakah until he actually gets the money back from him. We now move on to the recipients of zakah. Who do you give zakat to? The recipients of zakah are clearly mentioned in the Quran. Surah At-Tawbah, Allah clearly mentions that إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَمَسَاكِينَ. Allah mentions 8 categories. So these 8 categories are precisely and clearly mentioned in the Quran. You cannot give zakah to other than these 8 categories. If you do so, your zakah is not accepted by Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. To the faqirs and to the masakin. What is the difference between a faqir and a miskin? It's basically the same thing, a poor person, but the scholars state the faqir is let's say a very poor person. Let's say like a homeless person or whatever. He has less than even half the amount that he needs. And the miskin is someone who is poor, but he has some possessions. He has something, but not what he needs. So he might own a house, but he cannot feed his family properly, or he cannot pay for his children's tuition. Basically, the minimum amount that a person should be living at, he cannot live at that level. But he has some possessions, he'll be called miskin. If he's even lower than that, he'll be called faqir. Okay? So, I mean, again, the point is a person who cannot live according to what or how he should live. Such a person is categorized as a faqir or a miskin. Now, what is the difference between them? Again, the scholars have some ikhtilaf, but really it boils down to the same thing, because both are allowed sadaqah, or charity, excuse me. Both are allowed zakah. Okay? Or they don't have a car in this type of city where you need a car. And they're having very difficulty with, the bus system and whatnot. This thing, as a person, he might have some possessions, but he can't live normally. He is qualified as a miskin. You can give him zakah. The third category, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا. Those collecting it. Now in the Muslim state, what would happen is that the Muslim state would, and it should, if there is a Muslim state, send out people to collect zakah. So they'll assign you, and you. You go and collect zakah in this territory, you go to that territory, then they're going to go and collect zakah. Now obviously you need to give them some stipend, some wage, some salary. So Allah says the Muslim state can give these people their salary from zakah. In our times, obviously, we're not doing this, so this doesn't apply. But basically, the wages of those in charge of zakah. Anyone who's responsible, the ones who collect it, the ones who, write it all out, the accountants who are responsible for calculating it, then those who go and distribute it. Basically, the zakat department, where does it get its income from and its running operations from? Its cost of maintenance? From the zakat money itself. Again, that doesn't apply in our times. The fourth, وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Those whose hearts wish to be reconciled. These are the people who we are worried they are going to harm the Muslim state. Or that we want to make Islam soft for them, for their hearts. In other words, we want to guide them to Islam or protect Muslims from their evil. So the Muslim state only, not us, the Muslim state is allowed to give them zakat. The Prophet ﷺ would give large amounts of zakat to tribal leaders. And what would happen? As one of them said, the Prophet ﷺ gave him 2 valleys of sheep. I mean, hundreds and thousands, a huge amount of sheep. He gave it as zakah, he gave it to him. And he was not a Muslim at that time. And this is the only category you don't have to be a Muslim. The rest you have to be a Muslim. So the Prophet ﷺ gave it to him. This man went back and he said, "Oh my tribe, accept Islam. Because I have come from a prophet who does not fear poverty." He knows Allah will give him richness. So by giving this one person zakah, thousands of people accepted Islam and the Muslim ummah became stronger again. Again, this goes back to the Muslim state. It doesn't apply in our times. We cannot give zakat to mu'allafati qulubuhum because this is the Muslim state only. Okay, so we said that this fourth category is actually 2. The first is those whom you want to guide to Islam. By giving them a large amount of money, they become soft to Islam. It's human nature. The second is you want to protect the Muslim state from their evil or harm. You give them zakah, it's like a favor that they have. They cannot then do anything to harm you. The fifth category, وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, slaves. A slave always wants to be free. So he goes to his master. This is the fiqh of slaves, a separate chapter, we're not going to cover it. But the slave, this is something many people don't know. If he's Muslim, he can demand freedom from his master. At what price though? The master sets a price. A reasonable price. Say, okay, you must give me, let's say, $1,000, whatever the price of slaves is in our times. Allah knows how much it is. You must give me this amount of money. And then he must allow him to work for that money. This is a shari'i right. This is something not many people know about. The slave has the right for freedom. If he's intelligent, Muslim, pious Muslim, there's some good in him, he has the right to become free. The master says, give me the price and you are free. So this slave will then announce, I must collect this amount of money. And he is allowed to work, to do some, rent himself out for services, manual labor, and he can collect zakat. Okay, so zakat can be given to slaves when they desire their freedom. Again, Muslim only. All of these Muslim except for number 4. Number 6, those in debt. وَالْغَارِمِينَ. The scholars state that those in debt means that those who have taken a debt in order to bring some good to the community. Or they have a personal problem and they fell into great problems, financial problems, so they had to take a debt to get themselves out of that problem. For example, let me give you an example. A person comes and says, any common thing in the past is that 2 tribes will be fighting over some blood spilt between them. Okay, some person stands up and says, okay, I will pay this tribe, let's say 50,000 camels, if they stop this war between the 2 Muslim tribes. Okay, this person has got himself into debt in order to reconcile the Muslims. So the scholars, the Quran states that he can be given zakat. Another person in debt is that he lost a job, he's looking around for work, he has to borrow money from different people. Now he's continually out of work, he owes a lot of money to a lot of people. This person as well is considered one in debt. This does not apply to someone, for example, who wanted to go to medical school and took out a $150,000 loan. This is not the type of debt where you give him zakat to go to medical school. The point that there must be a shari'i reason for that debt. Either he wants to cause reconciliation between Muslims, or for example, a realistic example in our times. We have to pay, for example, $200,000 for the masjid, or else it will be taken back, a down payment. Okay? Now the person doesn't have the money himself, but he collects money from other people to pay the down payment for the masjid. So he comes in debt in order to help the society. This person can be given zakat to pay the debt off. This person, you cannot give zakat to the masjid, remember. But the person, if he paid from his personal money by collecting, debts, he got himself in debt. Now this person can be paid zakat. Likewise, we said another example is like a person who was not able to manage his finances properly. He lost a job, he kept on borrowing money, finally he's completely bankrupt. Legitimate bankruptcy, legitimate debt, you give him zakat. Basically, if you think about it, he falls under faqir and miskin then. Okay? What is not allowed is someone falls into debt of his own will for some luxury. Like we said, medical school, for example. Or he wants to buy a magnificent palace and he gets into debt. This person is not qualified for zakah. He shouldn't have done that in the first place. This is the point. There should be a legitimate reason for that debt. وَالْغَارِمِينَ. The 7th is وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, in the way of Allah. And this, the scholars state, means jihad. The actual mujahid, the one who is going for jihad, you can give him zakat to arm himself, to feed his family, this one. And this is only the case when he is not a paid servant of the army. Now, the army, if there's a Muslim state that has an army, they actually have a stipend, right? They have a salary. This is no zakat here. We're talking about volunteers. In the past, in many times, there would be no army. There would be the call for jihad, people volunteer. These people are qualified to take zakat fi sabilillah. Now, in our time, some ulama said, fi sabilillah applies to everything fi sabilillah. Building masjids, printing mushafs, these type of things. This is a very minority opinion. The vast majority of ulama of our time restrict it to actual jihad. Because there were always people building masjids, there were always people printing mushafs and printing knowledge books. Nobody asked for zakah for them. That is sadaqah jariyah. That is waqf, endowments. It's not zakah. Zakah is specific for these 8 categories. And I follow this opinion as well. You cannot give zakah for other things. And it's gone to ludicrous levels. I was present where there was a fundraiser for a television program station, where you needed $100,000 for one 30-minute session. And the scholar stood up and said, you can give zakah for this as well. SubhanAllah, Muslims are dying of hunger. And you're going to spend $100,000 for a television program? We all know it's expensive. Give your money for it, but not zakah. Donate, sadaqah jariyah, waqf. Expect reward from Allah. But you're going to give money for the fancy lighting and the director and this and that. And there are people that don't even have a place to live, and you're going to ignore them? So again, this is not zakah. This is sadaqah, this is charity, whatever you want to call it. But in my opinion, fi sabilillah is restricted to those who are actually in the way of Allah, physically. And the last is the wayfarer, the one who is traveling. وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ, Allah says. Ibn al-Sabil, the traveler. The traveler, what is meant by the traveler? If I take a vacation in Hawaii, I can take zakah? No. What is meant by the traveler is someone who has plenty of money in his hometown, but he's gone on a journey and his money ran out, or it was robbed, and he doesn't have the opportunity to get that money. Now technically he's rich, he has millions in his hometown. But in those days there's no bank accounts, no transfers, no ATM cards, so he's lost, stranded, he can take zakah. In our times this will only apply if the person cannot transfer the money from his bank to his location. Okay? If the person cannot transfer the money to where he is, then he qualifies under here. Otherwise, if he has money and he can transfer it, then that doesn't apply. Now, number 3, 4, and 5. They really practically cannot be practiced by us in our times. 3 is those collecting it. 4 is mu'allafati qulubuhum. 5 is slaves. Practically speaking, you can't really do it in our times. Okay, just know it, be aware of it. If the situation arises where you can do it, alhamdulillah. But I'm just being frank now. We don't live in those times anymore. So realize that these 3 categories you can't really, do in our times for most countries. Numbers 3, 4, 7, and 8. Those collecting it, those whose hearts need to be reconciled in the way of Allah, and the traveler. They can be rich. They don't have to be poor to accept zakah. So the one collecting it, even if he's a multimillionaire, the state has told him, spend 50 hours collecting it, the state will pay him for those 50 hours. It will pay him from zakah. So even if he's rich, he will take zakah. Those whose hearts wish to be reconciled, if the Muslim state gives, they are probably going to give to rich people, because those are the ones in power, right? So even if they're rich, they can collect that zakah. Number 7, in the way of Allah, the voluntary mujahid, even if he has money, he can take zakah. And number 8, the traveler, we explained, he could be a multimillionaire, but if he can't have the money right then and there, then he's allowed to take zakah for the situation that he is in. Number 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, all of them except for 4 have to be Muslim. The only case where the recipient of zakah can be a non-Muslim is number 4, those whose hearts wish to be reconciled. Everyone else has to be a Muslim. You cannot give zakah or zakatul fitr to a non-Muslim except for number 4, and we can't do that. That's the state's responsibility. So realistically speaking, no Muslim can give zakat to a non-Muslim. Another question before we move on to the next slide. Where should the zakat be given? Theoretically, zakah should always be given in your locality. This is the traditional opinion. However, I state that because of this, different times we're living in, I don't see any problem if a portion, not all, a portion of one zakah is transferred to another country. Because many times, for example, in this country, to find a Muslim who is really in need of zakah is quite difficult, to be honest, in most of the times. But to find a Muslim in other countries who's in need of zakah, very easy. People are actually dying of hunger. So in my opinion, because of the different times and situations we're living in, a portion of the zakah, no problem if you transfer it to another country. Especially, for example, you have family back home who are poor and they need zakah, there's a double reward to give them zakah. Because you're helping them in zakah and you're helping them because they're family, so there's a double reward associated with that. So I personally state that it is allowed to transfer a portion of your zakah to other countries. Many scholars used to say that this is haram in our times. Because of the situation changes, they also state that it is allowed to transfer zakat to another country. Who can you not give zakat to? You cannot give zakat to non-Muslims except for number 4 we said. You cannot give zakat to rich persons except for the ones we've already mentioned. We've discussed this before. You cannot give zakat to a strong man who is capable of working. Any man who's capable of working, even if it's manual labor, like we call it here, minimum wage job. If he's capable of working and he's not working because he doesn't want to, this is not a person who qualifies for zakah. He needs to stand on his feet and work as long as he's healthy and strong. The Prophet ﷺ, once a person came and demanded zakah, the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and he saw them to be strong. He said, if you wish, take it, but it's not allowed for a person who's strong and can earn his own money. Even if you have to collect firewood and sell it, as one hadith says, do it. But don't take zakah. Zakah is also not allowed for the family of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning the tribe of Banu Hashim. Those who are descendants of this tribe, they are not allowed to accept zakat money. They cannot accept it. Also, zakat is not allowed to be given to those whom one is responsible for. You cannot give zakat to your wife. You cannot give zakat to your son and daughter. You cannot give zakat to your mother and father. Why? Because if they're poor, shari'i-wise, you are obligated to take care of them. If you take care of them, you cannot give them zakah. You cannot give your son and daughter zakah because you have to take care of them if they cannot take care of themselves. However, a wife can give zakah to her husband. Why? If he's qualified to take it, obviously. If he falls into those categories. Why? Because the wife is not obligated to take care of the husband. The husband needs to take care of the wife. One last point, you can give zakat in advance. In other words, you can give it, before its due date, no problem. You can even give it before its year, no problem. Just remember how much you've given, and then if it turns out that you had to have given more, then you should give more. If it turns out you should have given less, then that extra is counted as voluntary charity. Abbas would give zakat for a year or two in advance, the uncle of the Prophet. He would give it in advance. Sometimes he would have a lot of money. He would say, okay, I want to give zakat in advance so that I don't have to worry about it at a later date. So he would give a large amount and remember that and then calculate accordingly. You can give it in advance. You cannot give it after its due date. If you do so, you're sinful. You cannot delay giving zakat. If you do so, you are sinful for every day that you do not give zakah, because zakah is an annual obligation. It can be given before, but you cannot give it after its due date. So every one of us sitting here needs to decide one date, be it 1st of Muharram, 1st of Shawwal, 27th of, Rabi' al-Awwal, doesn't matter. Some date must be decided, and then you must give zakah by that or before that date. You cannot give it after that date. As for charity, sadaqah, it can be given to anybody at any time, no conditions. You can give charity to a kafir, sadaqah. You can give it to a person who is rich, it doesn't matter. Charity has no conditions to it. Unlike zakat. Zakat, this is where the fiqh comes. You have to know who to give it to, when to give. Charity, you can give to anything. Building a masjid, printing Qur'ans for the schools. Realize, you cannot give zakat to many things which are good in Islam, because you're supposed to do them outside of zakah, like building a masjid. You cannot build masjid with zakah. Orphanage, you cannot have orphanages as zakah. You can feed them, you can give them money if they're faqir and maskeen, but you cannot build an orphanage with zakat money. It doesn't come under those 8 categories. Give sadaqah, and the more sadaqah you give, the better it is in the sight of Allah. But the zakah money is a special category. And this is the fiqh that we have discussed. As for charity, no conditions attached. Do whatever you want. Printing Qur'ans, printing books of knowledge for free, whatever you want to do, that comes under charity or sadaqah, and it doesn't come under zakah. That was the fiqh of zakah. The fiqh of fasting. In the fiqh of fasting, what do we talk about? We talk about how to decide the beginning and ending of the month. We talk about those acts which nullify the fast. We talk about those rules or the penalties that apply to those who do not fast, and other miscellaneous matters. We'll quickly go over them as well. These are the 4 main things we talk about in the fiqh of fasting. So we move on. How do we decide the beginning and end of the month? Firstly, before we move here, what fasting is well known, is obligatory on every single sane adult Muslim who is physically capable of fasting. Every sane adult Muslim who is physically, meaning health-wise, capable of fasting, except for the menstruating woman and the woman in her postpartum bleeding. Everyone else, it is obligatory to fast. This is beyond evidence. Everybody knows this. Even children should fast. Their parents should encourage them, but it's not obligatory until they reach the age of puberty. We know that the Sahaba would cause their children to fast when they were very young, maybe 5, 6 years old, because they would then get used to it. But it is not obligatory until the children reach the age of puberty. How do we decide the beginning and the ending of the month? The month is decided by either seeing the crescent on the 29th of the month, or the completion of 30 days. Okay? So if you see the crescent, it's understood. If it's the month of Shawwal, the month of Sha'ban, and it's the 29th day, when the sun sets on the 29th, right then and there, within 20 minutes, you should see a crescent. The first crescent is born right after sunset of the first day. Okay, so those people who try to look for the crescent after that, in reality, this would not be the crescent of the 29th. You cannot see a brand new crescent. A crescent is not born on the 29th, except right after sunset, within an hour or two, less than an hour actually. So if you see the crescent on the 29th, then obviously that signals the start of the next month, whether it's the 29th of Sha'ban or the 29th of Ramadan. Either way, the next day will be the first of the next month. And the other way that you decide the starting of the next month is you don't see the crescent and 30 days are finished. So if 30 days of Sha'ban are finished, then the next day is the first of Ramadan. Obviously, same applies the 30th of Ramadan, the next day is the first of Shawwal. If it is cloudy on the 29th, then you continue that month. You pretend that there is no crescent. If it is cloudy on the 29th and no one sees any crescent, then you assume that 30 days have been complete. I'd just like to state that historically speaking, never in the 14 centuries of Islam has the Muslim Ummah celebrated the beginning of Ramadan and Eid on the same day. Never. It has never occurred. It could not occur. Because the Muslims of Spain would not have found out about the crescent of Mecca, for example, except after 3 weeks. And the Muslims of China would not find out about the Muslims of Spain except for a month and a half. So there is no physical way for the Muslim Ummah to have united except in our times, with the phone and the satellite and this and that. Otherwise, before this time, the issue never arose. It's understood that every locality will have its own sighting. Therefore, it seems to me that the correct opinion is that every country should go by its own sighting, for the simple reason that that is the way it has always been, and it will always remain that way. And there's proof for this in the Sunnah. In that, Ibn Abbas was in Medina, his slave came from Damascus, Quraib, and when he arrived in Medina, he had arrived a week after Ramadan started, so he said, we started fasting on Monday in Damascus. So Ibn Abbas said, as for us, we started on Tuesday, and we are going to follow the Sunnah. Meaning he didn't care about the sighting in Damascus. He considered it to be for Damascus, and for Medina, he considered it to be of Medina. So in my opinion, every country has its own sighting. However, when it comes to our problem of North America, I believe that we should follow the majority of Muslims. In that whatever our main center decides, whatever city has its main center, whatever the majority of Muslims decide, for the sake of unity, we should stick with them. Because unity is something Allah loves, disunity is something Allah hates. So if the majority decide upon something, even if fiqh-wise we don't agree with it, it is a legitimate opinion. The other opinion is not shirk or kufr or bid'ah. It's a legitimate opinion. So for the sake of unity, we should sacrifice our opinion and follow the majority. This is my opinion. And the evidence for this is many, different types of evidences. Of them, the most explicit evidence is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The fasting is the day that you fast, and the fitr is the day that you celebrate fitr. Ponder over this hadith. It seems contradictory, but it's not. Fasting is the day that you fast. The first Ramadan is the day you consider it to be the first Ramadan. And Eid al-Fitr is the day that you celebrate Eid al-Fitr. What is the meaning of this hadith? It means that even if you were mistaken, it doesn't matter. In the sight of Allah, you are correct. In other words, suppose on the 29th it was cloudy, and no one saw the crescent. So the people completed 30 days, and then they fasted after that. Suppose there had been a crescent that nobody saw. Right? Suppose there had been a crescent, but because it was cloudy, nobody saw it. The Prophet ﷺ is saying, that doesn't matter. The first Ramadan is when you guys considered it to be the first Ramadan. And Eid is when you considered it to be Eid. This is the meaning of the hadith. So if you consider this hadith, and it's an authentic hadith, and apply it to our times, the way I see it being applied is the first of Ramadan is when your community decides it's the first of Ramadan. And Eid is when your community decides it is Eid. So my opinion is that we should follow the community. And if we're in charge, then that's a separate issue. We follow the fiqh opinion that every locality has its own sighting, or for our purposes, North America has its own sighting. This is what the majority of Muslims believe. Follow it. But as for us, the average Muslims, it's not in our positions. We are faced with a number of options. We can pray Eid with this group who claim that the entire world is celebrating one Eid. We can pray Eid with this group who claim that our community has its own Eid. Basically, follow the majority of Muslims. Whatever your main body of Muslims says, follow it for the sake of unity. As for those who disagree, may Allah forgive them. It is not something we should have hatred for, animosity for. This is a fiqh opinion. That's what they think. Let them do so. And this shows maturity as well. If you disagree about Eid, it's a fiqh ikhtilaf. It should not lead to the bickering that it does in our community or every community. This shows a difference between a knowledgeable person and a jahil. The knowledgeable person realizes this is a fiqh ikhtilaf. Whether you say Ameen out loud or silently, whether you place your hands here or here, whether you raise your hands every 4 times or not, it's a fiqh ikhtilaf. It's trivial. It should not lead to angering, to fighting, to bickering over this issue, to disunity. We would like for there to be one Eid, but there isn't. So do what you want, and alhamdulillah, we're all still Muslims, we're all still brothers in Islam. It should not lead to the hatred and the backbiting that it does. This is a problem, and wallahi, it shows ignorance on behalf of those who do it, even if they have the biggest alim degrees. Frankly, they don't realize that this is an issue of ikhtilaf of fiqh. Preach your opinion, call to it, but don't hate the one who opposes it. Don't look down at the other side, because it is a fiqh ikhtilaf. Have unity. We disagree over far bigger things. Don't let this thing cause hatred in the hearts. Try to reach unanimity. If it doesn't happen, don't worry about it. With that passionate plea, we move on to the mubtal acts of fasting. What acts are those which nullify your fast? Everyone knows, number 1, eating and drinking intentionally. Everybody knows. The most jahil Muslim knows if you eat unintentionally, drink unintentionally, no penalty. Alhamdulillah, some fiqh things, they're strong in everyone's mind because it's very easy to know and very convenient to know. If you eat or drink unintentionally, no problem. If you see someone eating or drinking unintentionally, problem. You have to correct him. Okay? So if you see your wife or your child who should be fasting, or any other person eating or drinking, immediately remind him that he's fasting and he has to stop. But if a person eats or drinks unintentionally, Allah has forgiven that. The second act, as we all know, is that of intercourse. The third is vomiting intentionally, meaning you wanted to vomit, you forced yourself to vomit. If you were sick and you vomited unintentionally, that does not nullify the fast, because the Prophet ﷺ clearly said that the one who vomits unintentionally, his fast is not broken. The fourth is ejaculation, or to reach a climax for a man or woman, to reach a climax intending to do so or knowing that one would do so. Okay? So whether it is through the act of masturbation, which is haram, but if it is done, it breaks the fast. Or even if a person was thinking about things or looking at things he shouldn't, and he reached that climax, it breaks his fast. If he intended or he knew that that would happen, obviously the wet dream or beyond one's control, a person is forgiven because the pen is lifted from the one who is sleeping. But if he did acts that would lead to this, for example, even foreplay with one's wife, and you knew that this would lead to this, then you are sinful for that, for breaking your fast, and you have to make it up, and your fast has become null and void. In contrast to going to sleep and having a wet dream, this is beyond your control. Your fast is not null and void. The fifth is the one who presumed the sun had set and he ate and drank. So he was hasty in breaking the fast. Because he was hasty, he will suffer the penalty for that. You should be careful and cautious that you should see that the sun has set, make sure that the sun has set, look at the time, and then break your fast after that. The sixth is the one there's the most ikhtilaf over, injections. Do they break the fast or not? Again, a lot of difference of opinion. Some people differentiate between intramuscular and intravenous. Some people differentiate between nourishing injections and injections that are medication. It seems, and Allah knows best, that every type of injection breaks the fast. If you have to take an injection, do so after your fitr, your breaking of the fast. If you cannot live without it, like you're a diabetic patient or something, in that case, in my opinion, fasting is not obligatory on you. If you need to take your injections, right? In my opinion, fasting is not obligatory on you in that case, and you move on to the sick one who pays a penalty, and there is no sin on you for not fasting. Those who do not fast. Number 1, women in menses or nifas. Women in hayd or nifas, They do not fast, obviously. What is the penalty on them? No penalty, they just make it up. No sin, they are prohibited from fasting, and they make up the fast after their menses or after their nifas. If menses, by the way, finish, if the blood finishes before Fajr, then even if they have not taken a ghusl, they must fast that day. So the women should be cautious. They should look at their cycle every morning before Fajr. When they're going to finish their cycle, they think the time will come, they should be cautious and see. If the blood finishes before the adhan of Fajr, they have to fast that day, even if they haven't taken the ghusl. The same, for example, applies for janaba, obviously. You can be in the state of janaba when you start your fast. You don't have to be in the state of ghusl to start it. But obviously you have to take the ghusl for the Fajr prayer. But if the adhan of Fajr is called and you're in the state of janaba, you still start your fast. No exceptions there. If the menses finish in the middle of the day, some scholars state she should not eat for the rest of the day. You understand? The menses finish at dhuhr or at asr. Is she allowed to eat or drink for the rest of the day? Some scholars say no. I say yes, because it's not her fast. Why should she be prohibited from eating or drinking? That's not her day of fasting. So she should continue, but she should obviously respect those who are fasting and not eat or drink in front of them. The second category of those who should not fast are the sick and the traveler. By the text of the Qur'an, those who are sick, slightly sick, or who are traveling, they have the excuse not to fast. If they fast, their fasting is accepted. No problems, no penalty. If they do not fast, no penalty, they just have to make it up when they become healthy or when they return back home. The sick, for example, he has a fever, for example, slight sickness, not a strong fever. If he thinks he can fast and he wants to fast, no problem. But it is better for him that if he thinks that his sickness will be prolonged or become worse, that he should not fast. In other words, it is encouraged for the one who is sick or the traveler not to fast if it will cause hardship. It is sunnah not to fast if it will cause hardship. Some people say the traveler in our times must fast because he is going to be in a plane, air-conditioned plane, sitting down, no hardship. No, this is not the case. The case is that if he is traveling, he need not fast. The issue arises, the question arises, what is better? Should he fast or should he not fast? The response, if it will make it difficult for him to fast, his traveling will become very difficult, his sickness will become longer or become very difficult to bear, then the sunnah is he should not fast. And if it is something, he has a slight headache, obviously this does not qualify as a sickness, or he's traveling for 3 hours and then it will be time for Maghrib. Most people in this case, they'd rather fast and get it over with rather than make it up after Ramadan. So for them it is better for them to fast and to avoid taking the concession. There is no penalty by the text of the Qur'an. They're allowed to break their fast and they make it up when they finish. The third person is someone who is old and cannot fast, or someone who is permanently sick and cannot fast, like the diabetic. He cannot fast. Severe diabetic, he cannot fast. Again, by the text of the Qur'an, there is no sin upon him, but there is a penalty of feeding one poor person for every day he does not fast. He feeds an average meal, one meal. For example, some meat and rice, whatever some staple food item is given, even a hamburger and fries, whatever is an average meal. You give that for every day to those who can accept that the zakat al-fitr, you give it to those people who are qualified to be given this penalty. Again, by text of the Qur'an, no ikhtilaf. If you're very sick and cannot fast permanently, the diabetic, he doesn't think he's going to be cured, or you are old and cannot physically fast, this is what you do. So as of yet, no ikhtilaf, no problems. This is where the problem comes, or the ikhtilaf comes. What should women who are pregnant or women who are breastfeeding do? Firstly, carefully listen to me. A pregnant woman or a woman who breastfeeds her child, they are not exempt from fasting unless they fear for themselves or their children. Many women think if they're pregnant, it's an excuse that they don't have to fast. No, this is not the case. No scholar says so. Only if you're scared that you will not be able to manage, you will faint out of weakness, or that it will harm your child, in which case the doctor will tell you that You know, you need to nourish your child, whatever. And again, go to a Muslim doctor. Non-Muslims don't understand this concept. The fact of the matter is that most women who are in their early stages of pregnancy should fast. The majority of women who are in the early stages, it is obligatory on them to fast. Because the amount of nourishment needed at this time is negligible. And they can't stay away for 8 hours, 9 hours without eating and drinking, without any harm to themselves or their baby. Just because you're pregnant or just because you're breastfeeding, this is not an excuse to avoid fasting. Only if you're fearful of yourself, your own health, or the health of your baby. The doctor tells you, for example, if you fast, you will not be able to breastfeed your child. Again, women are different. Some women, they will be able, the milk will flow if they have a good suhoor, and there's only 8 hours of the day, they will have no problem. Or if they take precautions and they express their milk and then use it later in the day. Again, they can take precautions and fast. Only if they are worried about their own health for the pregnant woman, or the health of their children for the pregnant or the breastfeeding woman, then they have an exception where they don't have to fast. Now the question arises, this so far no ikhtilaf. The question arises, what is the penalty on this woman? Will she be categorized in number 2, in which case she must make up the fast afterwards, or she be categorized in number 3, in which case she must give a penalty? Everyone following so far, right? Which category does number 4 come under? Number 4 is not mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. Number 2 is mentioned, number 3 is mentioned. Number 4 is not mentioned. So which category would you place the pregnant or breastfeeding woman in? Someone who temporarily cannot fast and then will be able to, or someone who permanently cannot fast like number 3? It's pretty clear, in my opinion, that she comes under number 2. Because the reasoning is the same. There's a temporary factor that prohibits her from fasting. Just like the one who is slightly sick or the traveler. When that reason is removed, then she must go to the ruling of number 2. Which is, she must make up that fast. Now the common question which is always asked, well, 1 year I was pregnant, my doctor said don't fast. The next year I was breastfeeding, he said don't fast. The 3rd year I became pregnant again with the 2nd child, the 4th year was that child. So I have like 120 days to make up. Frankly, sister, if this is the case, make it up. Take your time and make it up. Whenever you can, every 2nd day, 3rd day fast. After your children are 3 years old, they don't need your breast milk after that, then start your fasting. And this is the case. If you even think about it logically, Shari'i wise, there is no commonality between her and an aged person who cannot fast. Allah has made an exception because he can never fast. So Allah said that the aged person or the one who is permanently sick, give some charity or some penalty, fasting or giving food for 1 day. As for the pregnant woman, there's a temporary reason. Even if it is drawn out to 4 or 5 years, as is the case with some sisters, is still temporary. So she still goes back to number 2. And always remember, just because you're pregnant or breastfeeding, it is not an excuse not to fast. You need to get a medical verdict from a sincere Muslim doctor that tells you that if you fast, I'm fearful for your health or for the health of the child. Then and only then are you allowed or exempt from fasting. And in my opinion, you then fall under number 2 because it is a temporary thing which is then removed. So you should make up the fast after that. These are the only people who cannot fast. Every other sane adult Muslim must fast, otherwise they are sinful and they are in danger of a major sin, one of the major sins of Islam. Miscellaneous matters, other types of recommended fast, there's many. During the month of Muharram, the entire month, especially the 10th of the month, the 10th of Muharram, when you fasted, it forgives the sins of the previous year. Okay? During the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, especially the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, on this day when you fast, it forgives the sins of the previous and the future year. These are all sunnah fasts, the 6 days of Shawwal. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts Shawwal and then follows them up, whoever fasts Ramadan and then follows them up by the 6 days of Shawwal, it will be counted as 1 full year for him. Okay? Now, by the way, sisters or brothers who need to make up their fasts, they cannot fast Shawwal before finishing Ramadan because they haven't finished Ramadan. So the sister in her menses, she missed 7 days. After Ramadan, when it's Shawwal, she cannot jump to the 6 days of Shawwal. Why? Because that is wajib, this is sunnah. She cannot allow a sunnah to be done before a wajib. Secondly, she would not have finished Ramadan before jumping to Shawwal. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts Ramadan and then moves on to Shawwal. The woman who doesn't fast 7 days because of her menses has not fasted Ramadan. So she has to make up Ramadan, those 7 days, and then Shawwal, those 6 days if she wants to. 6 days are optional, remember. Okay, she cannot jump to the Shawwal without making up the missed days of Ramadan. Also the 13th, 14th and 15th of every single month is sunnah to fast. Also Mondays and Thursdays of every week it is sunnah to fast. And the best fast is the fast of Dawood. What would Dawood alayhi salam do? Fast one day and not fast another day. The voluntary fast, any of these voluntary fasts, they can be broken at any time with no penalty. If you want to just fast for the sake of Allah, a voluntary fast, and then in the middle of the day you became tired or dizzy or thirsty, no penalty. You can break it up and you don't have to make it. Obviously you've lost the reward, but there is no sin on you. Also, it is not prerequisite to have the intention before Fajr. Now the Fard fast is understood that you must intend before Fajr. Ramadan comes, you have to intend, oh Allah, I am fasting every single day of Ramadan. However, in a voluntary fast, you don't have to have that intention. If you wake up, for example, and then you rush to work or school, and then you pray Dhuhr or something, and then you realize you haven't eaten or drank anything from Fajr, you can start your niyyah right then and there, and then continue your fast until the end of the day. Obviously, if you had breakfast, you can't intend to fast after that. But we're saying if you remembered or you decided to fast in the middle of the day, and there was no food that you ate before or drank before, then you can have the intention in the middle of the day, and the rest of the day you abstain from eating and drinking, and that will count as fasting. We'll conclude by stating some days are strongly discouraged to fast by themselves. Of them is Friday and Saturday. You should not fast Friday by itself. You should not fast Saturday by itself. Also the day of doubt. The day of doubt is the day in which you're unsure if Ramadan has started or not. If it's the 29th of Sha'ban and the skies were cloudy and you weren't sure if the next day is the first, the next day is called the day of doubt. To fast that day is prohibited. Okay? Also, it is haram to fast on the two Eids. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Adha, you should not fast. And the days of Tashriq, also the days of Hajj, the 10th, 11th and 12th, it is disliked to fast on those days as well. We conclude. Oh, I forgot to give one last point. The penalty for breaking the fast of Ramadan. The penalty for breaking the fast of Ramadan, I forgot this. Here. This thing I forgot. There is one penalty that needs to be given. Everything else, if you do it, number 1, 3, 4, 5, 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6, if you do it, then you have to make up the day. Okay? But if you have intercourse, then there is a penalty associated with that, and that is that you must fast for 2 full months, or feed 60 people, or free a slave. You must do these things if you have intercourse in the daytime of Ramadan, because there's a severe penalty for that. The others, there's no penalty, there's just a sin, and you make up the day. But if actual intercourse occurred, then you must fast 2 consecutive months, 60 days non-stop. If even one day you didn't fast, you start to count all over again, 1 to 60, severe penalty. If you're physically not able to fast, then you move on to freeing a slave. If you cannot do that, then you move on to feeding 60 people. With this, we conclude the fiqh of fasting.
You've reached the conclusion of this CD. Take the opportunity to evaluate yourself by going to ilmquest.org, where you will find a short quiz